Well, we've done the first, we've done the second. It's now time to do the third. Welcome, everybody, to the Third Punic War. Today, we're going to be talking about why it happened, what happened, and of course, go over who was in the moral right. Despite losing two wars, Carthage remained an economic powerhouse, much to the disdain of the Roman merchants. And even though they had to pay great indemnities, it made no difference. They were still able to come back and become economic powerhouses once more. Seeing the success of the Carthaginian economy, this led the Romans to become really agitated, and many of them feared that Carthage would rise once more and become another strategic threat. This led, famously, Cato the censor to end every speech in the Senate with the phrase Carthago delinda est. We're going to go over some of the major players in the Third Punic War. So, on the side of Carthage, we have their military leader, Hasdrubal the Boatharch, not to be confused with any of the other several Hasdrubals throughout the previous Punic Wars. This is not Hasdrubal Barca, no relation. This is Hasdrubal the Boatharch. Another member that we have to talk about is Massinissa, the Numidian king and ruler and Roman ally. Another person we're going to be talking about is Censorinus, one of the consuls first tasked with taking down Carthage. Of course, we will briefly cover Cato the Censor and the most famous person from the Third Punic War, Scipio Aemilianus. So, why did the Third Punic War happen? Stewing hatred of the Romans and seeing no matter how much they forced them to pay and how much they stopped them from raising armies, Carthage continued to do well economically. And being that just 50 years prior, the greatest threat to the Roman Republic, Hannibal, rampaged throughout their Italian peninsula. This gave them the belief that at any point Carthage could bounce back and for a third time be a major enemy. But what was the real catalyst for this war? And that's simple. The real catalyst for this war was King Massinissa of Numidia constantly began land grabbing at Carthaginian lands. He knew they were unable to defend themselves, as they would be unable to raise any army to defend themselves without express Roman permission. Knowing this, Massinissa constantly breached into their lands and take them. On one such occasion, without express Roman permission, Hasdrubal the Boatharch gathered up 30,000 men and went to stop King Massinissa. He was joined by over 6,000 Numidian cavalrymen that were disgruntled with the leadership. Unfortunately, the men that Hasdrubal the Boatharch commanded were not an elite military force and were easily outmaneuvered by Massinissa, eventually surrendering to his force. Now, a Carthaginian man went to Rome, and they sent among him many ambassadors because the Roman war drums were already being banged. This was what they believed the start of the Carthaginian rise to power. When the ambassadors first arrived there, they simply implored with the Romans that Hasdrubal the Boatharch had, without their permission and without them knowing, raised this army to fight Massinissa. They promised the Romans that they had no connection to Hasdrubal. They had no idea that he was planning this, and they condemned his actions totally and completely. As they came and expressed how much they could not believe that Hasdrubal would do something like this, the answer from the Roman Senate was simple. Why have you come to us after you lost the battle? The Senate was met with complete silence. No doubt the Carthaginians had hoped that they would win the battle, and the Romans did have a point. If they condemned this action so much and were so against it, why did they wait for Hasdrubal to be defeated? The Carthaginians, even though they realized that the Romans were very upset with them, and they realized they would use this as an opportunity to mobilize against them, they did not want war with Rome. They were still much weakened militarily, and having lost the first two wars, even though they had paid back their debts, and they were now becoming economically secure again, they did not have the means to fight against Rome. They sent ambassadors to try and stop this oncoming Roman aggression. Rome demanded 300 hostages from the noble families of Carthage. The Senate agreed in Carthage. The noble families who did comply, complied with immense anger. These Carthaginian families believed that even if they gave their sons over, it would make no difference to the coming Roman aggression. And so with anger, they complied with their Senate's wishes. Rome also stipulated that at a later date, they must agree to whatever terms Rome decides to set to ensure that they have no ambition in becoming an empire and rising against Rome in the future. At this time, the two consuls, Manlius and Censorinus, were given secret orders from the Roman Senate to destroy Carthage. What the Roman Senate desired was the complete and total destruction of Carthage. Mobilization was started. The consuls, given their secret orders to destroy Rome, mobilized for war. Carthage sent envoys over to have their meeting with the consuls, where it was predetermined that they would have to accept further conditions to stop the war. Even though, secretly, it had already been decided that Carthage would be destroyed. The envoys of Carthage pleaded honestly. They told them, "We have given you all of our ships. We have paid you all of the money that we owed. We have given you our hostages now and before. What part of the treaties that our fathers had signed in the efforts to make us friends have we broken?" They implored them, "Are we not to be pitied? We lost 50,000 men by starvation at the loss of Hasdrubal. You accuse us of breaking the treaty by fighting Massinissa, who was grabbing up our lands all the time that we could not defend ourselves. If this is an excuse for war, we then condemned those who resisted them. We sent ambassadors to you to make explanations. What need is there of an army against men who have done no wrong to you? Nevertheless, we put ourselves entirely in your hands." The Carthaginian envoys displayed that we do not wish to deceive you in any way. We are not rearming. We only wanted to defend ourselves. We've given you the hostages in good faith. That Carthage was once great and mighty empire equal to their own, and they have lost that step. But surely they still deserve respect. Censorinus heard all that the ambassadors had to say, and he responded, "Why must I tell you why we are waging a war against you? especially when your ambassadors have been to Rome. You've already tried to explain your actions. We already told you that when you gave us the hostages, more terms would be imposed at a later date. We appreciate how quickly you sent the hostages. For that, you do deserve praise. But if you really want peace, why do you need any weapons? I therefore want you to bring all weapons and engines of war, both public and private, to the Romans. The ambassadors thought this was interesting. They did not know how to do this because Hasdrubal, who they just condemned to death, had 20,000 men coming back to Carthage. What would they do with him if they gave the Romans all of their weapons? To which Censorinus said, I will deal personally with Hasdrubal and his forces. And as such, the ambassadors agreed to give all weapons over to Rome. So to this point, Massinissa keeps invading Carthaginian property. They, in turn, defend themselves. Rome declares war on Carthage. Carthage, seeing this, gives them 300 of hostages from their noble families. Then they de-arm the entire populace at Rome's behest. They believe they have taken all the necessary steps to peace. But Censorinus then says his very next order. Give us Carthage. Move yourselves at least 10 miles from the sea, for we are resolved to raze your city to the ground. The Carthaginian ambassadors began to beat themselves, cut themselves, scream, wallow, smash the ground, for they had realized now the true purpose of this expedition. The consuls took great pity on these men, but were not moved to change. There were outcries from the Carthaginians. We have no ships. We have no arms. We have nobody to defend. Not a catapult, not a javelin, not a sword, nor men to fight. We have no mercenaries, no allies. You are in possession of our children. You are in possession of everything. But they saw how unmoved the consuls were. Banno was the most distinguished among the Carthaginians, and he obtained permission to speak and try and dissuade the Romans. Banno went up before the consuls, believing that this was his last chance to save Carthage. He spoke. To respect the contracts between Scipio and his people, just as his people had respected those treaties for the past 50 years. He said to them, we have no ships, no elephants. The tribute we have paid, and we have fought on your side in many battles. He said, do not take anger with us for our words, because we can take refuge in nothing but our words. It's all we have left. We have given you, the Romans, power over us, as the former conditions of Scipio have all been met. Of the present conditions, you consuls have asked us for the hostages which we have delivered to you. You asked for our arms, and you received them all. We had confidence in your word and character. Your Senate sent us word and confirmed it when the hostages were demanded. If we gave you the hostages and the arms, Carthage would be left free and autonomous. But how then can we be free and autonomous if you would destroy Carthage itself? Please, we beseech you. You say you have pity on us. Show us. How then can you, an ancient city, founded by the gods, which once hold the glory of the whole world, which still to this day has many temples of gods who have done you no wrong. Do not deprive them of their festivals and sacrifices, nor deprive the dead who have never harmed you of the offerings of their families to their tombs. Spare us our shrines, spare our forum, respect the gods who preside over our council. What fear can you have of Carthage when we have no weapons to fight against you? You ask us to change dwelling. It is impossible for our people, a countless number of whom get their lives from the sea. To move into the country, we propose an alternative more desirable for us and more glorious for you. Spare our city, which has done you no harm. But if you please, kill us whom you have ordered to move away. In this way you will seem to vent your wrath upon men, not upon temples, gods, tombs, and the innocent city. Do not tarnish the names of the people who've done the first dealings with us. Do not defile your reputation by an act so horrible to do and to hear, which you will be the first in human history to perform. Greeks and barbarians have waged many wars, and you Romans have waged many against other nations, but no one has ever destroyed a city whose people had surrendered before the fight, and delivered up their arms and children, and submitted to every other penalty imposed. Do not do this. The violence on your own fair record will be a calamity that will last to the end of time. Let us send another embassy to your Senate. It matters not if you let us send one more embassy. Whether you commit your acts now or later will have no significance. Allow us the time of one more senatorial visit. When Bano finished speaking, the consuls sternly looked on, showing that they had been unmoved. Censorinus replied, "What is the use of repeating what the Senate has ordered? It has issued its decrees, and they must be carried out. We have no power to alter the commands already laid upon us. If we were addressing you as enemies, it would be necessary only to speak and then to use force. But since this is for the common good, I have no objection into giving you reasons. The sea reminds you of the dominion and power you once had. It makes you do wrong and brings you to grief. By these means you invaded Sicily and lost. Then you invaded Spain and were driven out. While a treaty was in force, you plundered merchants on the sea, and in order to conceal the crime, you threw them overboard. You lost at Sardinia, and this lost you much access to the sea, which gave you more grief. In the like, the Athenians, when they became a maritime people, grew mightily, but they fell suddenly. Naval prowess is like merchants' gains, a good profit today and a total loss tomorrow. Believe me, Carthaginians, country life, with the joys of agriculture and freedom from danger, is much more wholesome. Though the gains of agriculture are smaller than those of mercantile life, they are sure a great deal safer. In fact, a maritime city seems to me to be more like a ship than like solid ground, being so tossed about on the waves of trouble and so much exposed to the vicissitudes of life, whereas an inland city enjoys all the security of terra firma. Ancient seats of empires were generally inland. Look at the Medes, the Assyrians, and the Persians. They all became very powerful. But I will omit kingly examples, which is no longer a concern to you. Look over your African possessions, where there are numerous inland cities out of the reach of danger, from which you can choose one that you would like to have for neighbors. When you look upon the barracks of your soldiers empty, and your horses and elephants with stables bare, what else comes to your mind but putting them back together? With the constant reminder of your once great city and once great power, you are driven to ambition and reclaim your former glory. That is why you must move out of the city. Once you see this great harbor and the walls built around shelter of an army, you desire an empire. Why should we spare our captured enemies? If you sincerely have abdicated power, not in words but in fact, you should be content to move inland. And if you honestly desire peace with us, prove it. Move into the interior of Africa, which is yours, and leave the sea, the dominion of which you have yielded to us. Please, please, do not pretend to be grieved for temples and shrines and tombs. We will not harm your tombs. You may come and make offerings there and sacrifice in your temples as often as you like. The rest, however, we shall destroy. You do not sacrifice to your shipyards, nor do you make any offerings to your walls. You can provide yourselves with other shrines and temples in another place to which you move. This will be your new country, just as you left your old one before Carthage. Understand, then, that we do not make this decision to be evil towards you, but in the interest of a lasting peace and the common security of Rome and yourself. Now again, you mention that many of your people make their money from the sea. We have thought of this. In order that you might easily have traffic by sea and a convenient importation and exportation of commodities, we have not ordered you to go more than 10 miles from the shore, while we, who give the order, are 12 miles from it ourselves. We offer you, take whatever place you choose, and when you have taken it, you shall live under your own laws. This is what we told you beforehand, that Carthage should have her own laws if you would obey our commands. We consider you to be Carthage, not the ground and buildings where you live. Once Censorinus had stopped speaking, the Carthaginians realized that war would be upon them. They also realized that upon going back to Carthage to deliver the message that war was imminent, it was likely that they would be killed. And so they asked them to send a fleet showing the Carthaginian people just how serious the situation would be. And the Romans agreed to this. When the ambassadors went back and told the people what they had done, they marched in silence all the way back into Carthage, the people clamoring, ripping at them, tearing at them, wanting to hear the answer, war or peace. Once they were locked inside the Senate chamber, they told the truth. War was upon them, something the Carthaginians, in their darkest thoughts, had always known. Many of the disgruntled noble families killed the senators who made them give up their children, seeing now the complete and utter futility in this decision. As you can see from these two competing diplomats, we see that the consul of Rome, Censorinus, already had his orders, and he would have an answer for whatever was thrown at him. It did not matter that they had given their hostages. It did not matter that they had given their arms. They would simply keep pushing until Carthage could not comply. The arguments are very interesting and fun to read and hear about. Forcing Carthage to move 10 miles inland. And yes, Rome is 12 miles inland. Very funny joke. But Obviously, they still had access to the sea and they had many coastal cities, but Carthage did completely rely on its seafaring trade. So this would completely crush the economy that had made Carthage what it was and allowed them to not only pay their debt to Rome, but still thrive. This would inevitably crush Carthage one way or another. And so they knew they had to defend themselves. That was all that remained. They were given no option. They must fight, and they made ready for war. Constantly, every single workshop, every single house, every aspect of Carthaginian life was now focused on defense. Hasdrubal the Botharch was now again put in command of the army, his sentence to death reversed, if only momentarily. Day and night, tirelessly, the Carthaginians worked, making ships, making weapons, making armor, trying to prepare themselves as best they could for war. Ironically, Manlius and Censorinus took their time. They thought, well, this will be easy. All we have to do is fight a city of people with no weapons. They did not expect the Carthaginians to tirelessly work to try and rebuild as much armament as they could. So once they finally arrived and sieged Carthage, they were amazed that they had to fight. They thought this would be a very simple casting them out, but instead, what laid ahead of them was a siege. A siege which they constantly mismanaged and allowed Carthage to hold out. But despite this, a young man by the name of Scipio Aemilianus distinguished himself greatly in deeds in battle. So that 2 years later, he was elected consul and given supreme command of the expedition. He saw, after the 2 years of war, complete lackadaisical effort on his troops' part. He reinstituted order to the soldiers, and eventually they sieged the walls. And upon taking these walls of Carthage, much to the amazement of Scipio, the Carthaginians still refused to surrender, something that up to that point had never happened in Roman history. Typically, when the walls were taken, it was over. The fight was over. But not in this case, for the Carthaginians knew this was a war of destruction, and they would fight to the last man. Each building became a staging ground, fighting to the death. Scipio, knowing the streets to be too dangerous and too well known to his combatants, stuck to the rooftops, clearing the houses and moving on to the next. The Roman soldiers used a relay system to constantly get fresh people fighting, as where the Carthaginians were unable. Eventually, the Carthaginians, after much fighting, from rooftop to rooftop, from building to building, were restricted to the final citadel. Hasdrubal, seeing that this was truly over, surrendered to Rome and Scipio Aemilianus. His wife appeared at the top of the citadel. As the fires raged below, engulfing the citadel, Hasdrubal's wife slaughtered his 2 children and flung herself from the roof of the citadel. Many of the Romans, Scipio Aemilianus and others, thought of her as a most honorable woman, and thought perhaps Hasdrubal should have done that in her place. Hasdrubal was made to march in Scipio Aemilianus's triumph, now known as Scipio Africanus the Younger. And with that, the Third Punic War was closed with a complete and total victory for Rome. 400,000 Carthaginians were slaughtered, and the remaining 50 to 80,000 were sold into slavery. This is the end of the Punic Wars. Scipio Aemilianus, watching the city ablaze, began to weep. Not out of love for the Carthaginians or for the acts which he committed because he believed that one day the same fate would befall Rome, and that thought led him to tears. So, we're going to start with Carthage and how culpable Carthage is in their actions in the Third Punic War. Um, yeah, I mean, let's break it down from the Carthaginian perspective. So, you are getting your land constantly grabbed up by a Numidian king 50 years after you've surrendered from your second loss to Rome. Uh, and so you decide enough is enough. You raise an army, you go, you fight and defend against that invading conqueror, and you lose. Immediately after this, you condemn those actions and try to defend yourself when you hear the murmurs of the Roman war drum beating. And you think to yourself, okay, they'll probably just chill out as soon as we tell them, that guy, he just did that crazy thing he did. Sorry about that. Not so much. Yeah, they're definitely coming for war. But you don't know that yet. So when they request 300 of your children, you send them. And then when they request all of your weapons, you send them. And then finally, they ask you to leave your city and destroy your economic way of life. And that's when you realize, yeah, I guess we gotta go to war. I don't think there's anything other to put than justified. This is perhaps one of the most justified wars, completely a defensive war. I mean, yeah, they complied with everything the Romans wanted with the one exception of just not leaving their city to be destroyed, and they had to defend themselves. Um, you have to say in the overall scheme of the Third Punic War, with how well they complied, everything they did, I believe there probably isn't a more justified case of defensive war. As for the Romans, I know that many of you probably, might be thinking off the jump, well, obviously, Third Punic War, you got to put that in the very bottom tier, the mandate of hell, reserved for the worst of the worst actions. But I just can't do that. I don't believe that it's the worst of the worst, okay? Is it justified? Not at all. I mean, I really cannot put it in justified. Let's think now on the actions they took, right? They essentially coerced this Numidian king with lands, you know, letting him know that they can't defend themselves, or they would not permit the Carthaginians to defend themselves against him. They knew inevitably this would result in them trying to defend those lands. So they essentially provoked the war. Then, after provoking the war, they took your envoys in and took 300 of your children, demanded further that you give them all of your weapons. They gave you all of their weapons. Then you demanded them leave their town. And the joke that you throw in there is, hey, yeah, we only want you to move 10 miles and we're 12 from the ocean, so come on, no big deal. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. So that would make you say, well, clearly it's an unjust war, right? And I'm going to tell you what. If you break down the Third Punic War strictly by itself, I think it's clear cut. I think it's clear cut that it's unjust. But let us remember that a mere 50 years before this, Rome was brought to its lowest state in its history to that time of an invading general rampaging throughout the entire peninsula. These enemies were so inside of the Roman mind. They were so afraid of them. And now they're sitting there watching, after all of the fines being paid, all of the things that they've done to suppress this empire, they're watching them still become an economic powerhouse after everything they've done. So in their mind, In a lot of these Roman minds, if they don't stop them now, they're going to have a repeat of Hannibal. Fear is what led to this decision, and it was wrong. I firmly believe that it was unjust. But let's try to understand from the Roman perspective how afraid they were. I mean, we're talking about something that happened 50 years ago. This is in their lifetime, many of them. And if they're children, they would have heard it from their parents or their grandparents. It was deep in the Roman psyche. I mean, there was a literal army led by these people, or this government, if you will, led by this nation inside of their territory, rampaging for years. It was it was to that point the most soldiers that the Romans had ever lost at the Battle of Cannae. They're terrified of these people. After beating this great enemy, they see them still, despite all of the harsh restrictions put on them, thriving. And they decided, with them expressly raising arms without their express permission, decided it was time to end them. Now, where I think if you just go off that, you go to watch it play. And I think a lot of you people, they kind of hear this 50 years ago thing. And you go, well, it was 50 whole years ago and they're still harping on it. I mean, I think it's, there have been wars in the modern era that people still harp on much past 50 years. So I think you have to understand this is not something that happened hundreds or thousands of years ago. This is in many cases in their lifetimes, in many cases, and in most cases, their parents or their grandparents. So this is not some far and away thing. This is a very real threat in their minds. And they're watching this very real threat become an economic powerhouse, which is why I think for the start of the war, I have to give it watch it play. Where it gets real dicey is the remaining actions in the war and the build up to it. But I am not going to put that on Rome itself. I will say Rome, as a general people, are very close to unjust, but we're going to put them in watch it playa. Now let's talk about a man named Scipio Aemilianus, also known as Scipio Africanus the Younger. Where does he fall in the culpability? His actions, I think Scipio, his actions were justified. Now, that's probably going to be a shock to a lot of people. Like, eh? But let me tell you this guy is a soldier in the army of Censorinus and Manlius. He proves himself through his efforts and eventually rises to the position of consul. When given the task, he makes sure that he cracks down on the men and insubordination, trains them up, gets them ready, gets them focused, goes and completes the task that was given to him. Where others had failed, 3 consuls before him could not do this, and he did. And once he took the walls, the people continued to fight. He fought rooftop to rooftop. He did these things. I don't necessarily think that he did any more than was asked of him. I don't think it was exceptionally cruel beyond the fact that it was already exceptionally cruel to be doing this and having this war, but I believe that Scipio, within the best of his actions, or within, I believe that Scipio Aemilianus did the best that he could, given the circumstance he was put in. Hasdrubal the Boetharge. This is a tough one because he is responsible for raising that initial army against Massinissa. So, in a way, that is what sparked this war. Obviously, I don't think you can blame him for that action. I think that was a just action. And he continues to defend himself until Scipio breaks down the citadel and he surrenders to Scipio. Watching his wife kill his children and throw herself from the top of the burning citadel. I mean, the guy did not have a chill end. Definitely had a tough life. I don't, outside of And here's the thing with Hasdrubal you have to factor in. They condemn this guy to death. After his failure and his loss to Massinissa, he was condemned to death, and he was coming back with the remainder of his men to Carthage, and he seems like an honorable sort. I believe he might have accepted that punishment. Then the Carthaginian Senate says, actually, we'd like you to lead the war against the Romans. And you know what he does? He does it. And he does it to the best of his ability and he takes a populace that had literally got rid of all of their weapons, helps them rearm, and tries to fight many, many engagements against the Romans. And, this turned into a 3.5 year war, I believe, or longer. So this turned into a multi-year war. So he did a pretty good job within the circumstances. And I think almost every action he takes is just in defending his country, including the first one against Massinissa. Here we come to Manlius and Censorinus. Guys, this is where stuff's going to get a little interesting. I have to firmly put Censorinus, at least, in unjust. And you're saying, what? Censorinus receives secret orders from the Senate to destroy Carthage no matter the cost. Now, I get that you're saying, well, Scipio received essentially the same orders and you put him in justified, and you're going to claim that Censorinus is unjust. I just find the tongue-in-cheek way of his answers to the envoys and ambassadors. I just got to put this guy in unjust. I mean, probably one of the biggest in history, for them to come to him and say, we were friends, our forefathers wanted us to be friends, we surrendered to you. And for him to just be like, you think we don't know that? He's like, I don't have to justify anything to you. I'm going to do what I want to do. And then just to keep pushing them. Oh yeah, you guys, you guys have to move from the sea, but there's plenty of great kingdoms that were agricultural in nature in the country. But that doesn't matter to you because you guys don't want empires. I mean, the guy just keeps slamming him every chance he gets. And of course, the tongue-in-cheek remark, oh, you can move just 10 miles when we ourselves are 12. I mean, the guy's an ass. He clearly, but again, to be fair, I'm actually changing my mind because he is an ass. And he did give these terrible answers, which were answers, of course. And of course, he said many things that are actually really funny when you read it. It's actually hilarious to see how he answered all the complaints of the ambassadors. But he did make the demands, not of the 300 that was from the Senate, but he did make the demands for disarmament. He did make other demands, and he did tell them to move. Now, obviously, these are all dictated from the Senate as well, but he was never going to relent. And I think the manner at which he did it, even though it's said that he showed pity, I don't think he really displayed that in his actions. And on top of that, he failed to take over a disarmed people and allowed them time to rearm. So I just have to put him in unjust for being a stupid guy and also being an ass. That being said, I gotta be honest, hilarious the way he dealt with the ambassadors and the envoys. Some of the funniest responses to people pleading with you not to start a war, and just being so frivolous. Be like, dude, I don't know what to tell you. You know what I mean? We're 12 miles from the ocean. You'll figure it out. You don't. Oh, you're worried about your temples and shrines? Well, you don't pray to your dockyards, right? So no problem. It's just good on him for that, but unjust. We're gonna save this guy for last, and we're gonna go to Massinissa. You got to put Massinissa in unjust. I'm going to put him, honestly, here's the thing. You could argue that Massinissa is justified. He's just trying to expand his kingdom, get them places, but Massinissa, an important part of this, is he was a Carthaginian ally, or at least pseudo-ally, and he's defected, if you will, to, when he saw how well the Romans were winning, he said, I'm going to side with the Romans. So, an opportunist, as we can see. And not only, I mean, obviously he's an opportunist because now that he sees a nation that can't fight, he goes and grabs up all their land. And you can argue, like I said, where he might be somewhat in the right, or not in the right, but less culpable, is that Rome probably prodded him to do so, at the very least, if not directly, indirectly. But still, this is the man who took these actions and attacked a people that he pretty much knew could not defend themselves. Um, so I think, and Massinissa is ultimately responsible for the engagement that led to the Third Punic War, and I think his actions were completely unjust. I won't put him in a mandate of hell because, like I said, just an opportunist, just a kind of a bad action. And I don't think when you read about Massinissa, it doesn't seem to me to be that bad of a guy, although there was a lot of squabbling in Numidia. But I don't think, as a whole, Massinissa is a bad guy. But I do believe that the action of raising war and taking property from people who can't defend themselves is unjust. And I know you say, well, how can you possibly say Massinissa is uh, bad, and but you're not putting Rome as that? Well, again, I'm talking about a Roman people who were always enemies of Carthage and still afraid of them. And you could argue they controlled them, but still, these wars happened. Massinissa was a friend of these people and saw them losing and turned on them. So for that, I got to put him below Censorinus. But now we come to the last and final person who we have to judge for culpability in the Third Punic War, and that is Cato the Censor, and we are putting him in unjust. I mean, I would love to put this guy in the mandate of hell, but he's got a lot of. I have a little bit of respect for him, or a lot of respect actually, but I've got enough respect for him that I can't do that. But I have to put him in unjust because this is the guy. This is the guy that drummed up constantly in the hearts and minds of the people that Carthage must be destroyed, as he ended every single time he spoke in the Senate, Carthago delinda est, which was echoed by other senators. But this is the man responsible for that. And you can imagine if you're just having a Senate meeting about the aqueducts or something going on, or this guy's baking too much bread or whatever's going on, and at the end of it you go, and by the way, yeah, we gotta destroy Carthage. We got to salt that thing to the ground, right? We got, it's just constantly being brought up by this guy. So that not only are you hearing it from your family, whatever, this is constantly in the Roman Senate being pushed by Cato the Censor. And I believe the reason that we saw such unjust actions being taken, such hostility towards them, is from the constant remembrance of Carthage as an enemy from Cato the Censor that led Rome to take these actions. And I believe if any one man is singularly the most responsible for it, it would be him. And I have to put that in unjust. I understand he was afraid. I understand these things, but you are a man who has immense power, and you use that power to constantly, at every opportunity you could, plan the extermination of a people who completely had subjugated down to you. Um, so that being said, that is the Third Punic War. Culpability, morality, tier list. I think obviously Carthage, Hannibal the Boatharch, Scipio, all justified. I firmly stand by that. Rome, they're right on the border of unjust, guys. I just think that there's, as far if we're talking strictly about the Senate, I would put this in unjust. But we're talking about the soldiers, the people. I cannot mark that on them for everything they had went through. Censorinus, just for being an ass, a funny ass, but an ass, you gotta unjust. And Massinissa for being a craven opportunist who kept waging war and grabbing property of people who couldn't defend themselves, unjust. And Cato for, effectively drumming up war in the minds of every single Roman that would listen to him. So this is the final list, and I'm happy with this. I agree with this. This is to me the first war out of the three that I would put in Watch It Playa. This is the first war that I feel comfortable saying, this is definitely out of the three, and I don't think anyone would disagree with this, the worst. This is definitely the worst one, the one that did not need to happen, the one that was pushed way, way, way too far. But that is it, and that's the third Punic War. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to see more videos, we're going to probably go through the rest of Roman history as much as we can, and yeah, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe.